This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. And this lesson is 6x6 picture type number 5, otherwise known as the flowchart. And super quick review, we'll remember that we went around our 6x6 drawing who and what, how much, where. We added those together to get a sense of the passage of time, which we called when. And when we're able to watch the passage of time many times, we begin to see how things work, and the picture that we draw to reflect how something works is the flow chart. So let's quickly review, what does that actually mean from a vision science perspective? Well, we might remember when we looked out at the world, our mind's eye saw a number of things. We saw what was out there, we saw the numbers of them, and we saw their position. And all of those things were taking place at the same time. And then as we continued to watch, we saw things moving, changing their position, and that gave us the sense that time was passing, which allowed us to see when. Well, now we're going to go a little bit further, because we're not just going to see when things happen, but we're going to, based on when they happen, look for cause and effect. And in fact, what we're looking for there is the underlying how does it work. So, for example, as we were looking at our picture, we saw that there was a little girl, and that girl had a little dog. And then as we watch things take place, we might say, well, isn't it interesting if, there's going to be a lot of ifs and thens here, if that dog saw some birds, something then is going to happen. And what happened? Well, if the dog sees the birds, the dog will run to the birds. And if along the way the dog hits the baby carriage, those parents are going to panic. And now we've got our cause and effect, kind of something we might also refer to as a decision tree. This thing led to some other things, but we don't know exactly which ones, which led to some other things. And along the way, we've got the idea of options and outcomes. And that is exactly what we mean when we talk about the how pathway and what we're going to represent with flow charts. Let's just real quickly think about some of the specifics of picture type number 5, which we know are called flow charts. And, let's go ahead and start with an example. So let's just say we had a starting point. And at our starting point, we had two things. We had a very unhappy little baby, and we had an apple. Now, what could we do how could we combine these two things to try to get a different outcome? So imagine if we did nothing. If we did nothing at all, our baby is only going to get louder and louder and cry even more. But if we gave that apple to that baby, we're now going to find something different. We're going to find that we get a very happy baby, and we lose most of our apple. And that's what we mean by a flow chart. The flow of cause. What caused what else to happen? So what does a flow chart show? Well, it shows cause and effect. What is the coordinate system that we want to use when we want to draw one of these flow charts? The coordinate system of a flow chart is very simple. It starts with an action, which then leads to a response. The coordinate system is a simple unidirectional or perhaps bidirectional flow that says action A led to response B. So that's our coordinate system, from here to here and perhaps back, or perhaps some other options. So what then is our starting point for drawing a flowchart? Well, we have two options. We can either just say, pick the first action. Our starting point is simply action A. And what's going to happen from that? We just draw the first action and see what happens. Or we could start at the other end and say, we start by saying, here's what happened, here was the response, and then we work backwards and say, well, what was it that caused that response? So our starting point for drawing a flowchart is just picking an action or picking a response. And what, of course, is the relationship of objects in a flowchart? Well, it is the relationship of influence. If I ended up with this, what are the various things that might have happened along the way to give me that? What is the influence of the things that I'm showing? It's no longer just what is the relationship in space. It's no longer just what is the relationship in time or in size. It is the relationship of influence. That's what I'm mapping out with my flow chart. So let's look at a couple of examples of flowcharts. And why don't we go ahead and start with something pretty simple, the kind of thing that might happen on any given day when we want to map out a chain of events. Let's say there's me sitting here, not doing very much, and with me, of course, is my very old school phone, drawn so I can tell that it's a phone. And there's a phone on one side of me, and there is a button sitting on the other side of me. And let's say that the phone started to ring, and I say, wonder what's going on with the phone. I wonder what happens if I do not push this button. If I don't push the button, I'm guessing that in this case, the phone is only going to get louder and louder. But if I went ahead and pushed that button, in this case, the phone may go silent. So there's a very simple little flowchart indicating cause and effect. Don't push the button, phone gets louder. Do push the button, phone goes off. What do you know? I'm learning. I'm learning cause and effect based on what I am seeing. And in this case, certainly also what I'm hearing. So that's one type of flowchart. Now there's another type of flowchart, which is actually, we talked about this quickly, we're going to call a decision tree. And what we mean by that, of course, is a tree has lots of branches and lots of roots, and it helps us make decisions about what are the options. And a way to talk about this might be to take something that's going on in sports right now as I do this clip, which if we think about the NFL, the National Football League, and we've got two groups within that. We've got the NFC and we've got the AFC. And we've got Team A in the NFC playing Team B. And in the AFC, other conference, we've got Team X playing Team Y. Now, the decision tree says if A and B play each other and A wins, we've made a decision. And X and Y play each other and X wins. We've got another decision. And the decision is who's going to play at the Super Bowl. And it's obviously going to be Team A against Team X. And if the winner is Team X, we now have a Super Bowl winner getting the nice big trophy and lots of happy team members for Team X, unless, of course, you were associated with Team Y, in which case you were very unhappy a long way back. So that's what we call a decision tree, another type of flowchart. I think we could map out a couple more. We've talked a bit in these lessons about human cognition. So why don't we go ahead and make a flowchart of how the brain works. And let's make a simple one here. So in the case of cognition, well, let's draw a little schematic diagram first. So human brain, let's draw two pieces of it. We've got the reptilian brain down here, and we've got the very fancy mammalian neocortex sitting on top. So there is sensory information that comes in, and there are behaviors that come out. And the way our brain works, first of all, is sensory information comes in through all of our senses, including our eyes and our ears and our mouth and our fingers and all of that. And it gets processed in our reptilian brain, and we take behaviors. We humans are particularly blessed because we've got this very sophisticated neocortex on top that allows us to do a lot more sophisticated processing of that sensory information, and therefore, in theory, take a lot more sophisticated behaviors. So how does the brain work? Takes sensory information and turns it into behaviors. And there's a very simple little flowchart about cognition and the human brain. Well, let's think about a flowchart that might reflect a little bit more the kind of decisions that we need to make in business. So let's say that, we'll remember how we started a flowchart is we just start with an action. And let's say our action, our point is that our business sells things. We're in sales, and sales are flat. Well, there are some other options. What are the options for sales? Well, there are really three. Sales could be going up, which is a great thing, and if sales are going up, we don't really have to do much. The other option is sales could be going down, which is a really bad thing, and we're going to need to take some kind of action. Sales going up, sounds great, don't worry about it. Sales remaining flat, we need to take action. Sales going down, we certainly need to take action. So what kind of action, as we make our decision tree, could we take? Well, if sales are remaining flat, or if sales are going down, there are a few things we could do. Number one is we could increase the number of customers that we have. We could do that. Another thing that we could do is we could increase the number of sales per existing customer. That's another option. Or perhaps another option is we could just move into a different business. That's a possibility. Now, let's continue our decision tree. If we need to increase the number of customers we have, what are our options? Well, we could look for new customers. One is we could increase the number we have of old customers. We could do that. And perhaps one of the ways we could do that is we could lower our price, or we could increase our promotion, or we could find a new market. Those are some of the things that we could do. Or, there's an opposite for each of those. We could actually try to increase our price. That might not make a lot of sense, but we could try. We could try to change our promotion. We could try to expand our existing market. Or we could try to improve our product. So what we're really mapping out here is we don't need to just react. We can be proactive in thinking, if this is what's happening, there it is again, if this is what's happening, then we could try these things. And if we have these results, perhaps we can impact what our sales are doing. So again, that's the purpose of trying to draw a flowchart, making decisions visible. Decisions and outcomes visible. So let's think for a moment about when do we want to use a flowchart. Well, I really think that there are probably 4 times when using a flowchart is the type of picture that is the appropriate one for us to draw. And all of those, of course, relate back, obviously, to the question of how. How does it work? How might I respond? And the first time that we want to use a flowchart, of course, is when we want to show cause and effect. Okay, so when we want to show cause and effect, when we want to say that this thing becomes this thing, or maybe this thing, and there's some difference there. When we want to show cause and effect, what does it take to make either of those happen? We draw a flowchart. Another time we want to draw a flowchart is when we're interested in what are our options and what are going to be the outcomes of our options. Outcomes and options. So if I am, in fact, here, are my options that I could do that, or that I could do that, or perhaps I could just do that? That's the time when we want to draw a flowchart. It's not specifically a linear sequence because there are options. So we're going to not just draw a timeline. No, we're going to draw a flowchart that shows options. Another time, parallel, is when we want to show, well, what are the possibilities? What are the possibilities? So again, if I really do want to have that outcome, or perhaps that outcome, or perhaps that outcome, what might be the various steps that I would need to take in order to get each of those to happen from this starting point? So when I want to show the possibilities and the options to make them happen, that's also when I want to draw a flowchart. And I think there is a fourth time when I want to draw a flowchart, which is when I want to literally show complexity. Let's face it, the problems that we face today are complex. If I intentionally want to show complexity, one of the best ways to do it is to draw a typical flowchart, because in most cases, most flowcharts very quickly show that there are so many options in any given sequence or any given string of cause and effects that if I want to map all of them out, I can show that really my idea might seem a little bit counterproductive, but if my intent is to show that something is incredibly complex, go ahead and map out every process. And the beauty of having shown the complexity, starting out with the complexity, mapping it all out, is then if I want to continue, eventually I might, like we did with that drawing of the human brain, be able to come up with a simpler model that might then be able to show clarity. And so that's what I'm really trying to achieve by drawing my flowcharts. Move from complexity to showing clarity, and how would I make that happen? All right, well, let's summarize with flowcharts for a moment. Picture type number 5 from our 6x6. And you know, the people who tend to use flowcharts the most tend to be people in engineering. And so let's go ahead and make an engineering flowchart. This applies to almost anything in engineering, because the essential question that we often ask ourselves when we're engineering or designing a system is, well, does it move? So let's make a very simple little decision tree model about answering that question. Does the thing move? And if our answer says no, it does not move, then we then ask ourselves, well, should it? And if the answer is no, it should not move, well, guess what? We've got no problem. Does it move? No. Was it supposed to? No. No problem. We're happy. But what if the answer was yes? It's supposed to move, but it's not. Well, now we engineers have an answer for that one, and that is the ever famous and ever useful WD-40 miracle lubricant. Answer to any time when something's not moving and it's supposed to, give it a blast of WD-40. So let's look at the other side of our engineering decision tree. Let's say, does the thing move? Well, yes, it does move. Now we have to ask ourselves, well, should it move? If the answer was yes, that thing was supposed to move, again, we're happy because we've got no problem. But what if the answer is no, it's moving and it's not supposed to? Well, now we have another engineering cure-all, known, of course, in this case, as duct tape. And duct tape, of course, becomes our opposite. Our options are, if the thing moves and it's not supposed to, we use duct tape. If the thing doesn't move and it's supposed to, we use WD-40. And now, of course, the point of this is why we draw a flowchart. It shows the options. It shows cause and effect. It gives us the ability to map out in a way we can see what is it that we should do and how will that impact what I want to have happen.